then I stand corrected. So I fully agree with you. So let me move to my argument number 1. So this is this gentleman who's basically saying I have 22 points. So for everybody's some who are not aware from ITIL background, we have this something called as 22-point system in ITIL to become ITIL V3 expert, and only once you have those you can really get certified as an ITIL V3 expert. This gentleman he says, I am fully certified ITIL, therefore I am right. Therefore you must be satisfied. ITIL certifications mean I am doing everything right and I will be able to do it. In fact, many of us know it's hard to fail the foundation exam than pass. I haven't heard a single person coming and telling me that I have failed foundation. It's really very hard to fail the foundation exam. So what I am basically saying is there are so many things which best practices are really bringing up, but are they really meeting the client requirements? What client wants and what many times best practices are pushing up is not really what a customer wants. Moving to my next argument. Customers don't want 1/4 drills. They want 1/4 hole. Best practices are basically just ending up giving them drills which should be of this particular size. But customers really don't want it. What they wanted was that on a wall they wanted a hole which was of size 1/4. And what many times best practices are focusing around is that standard processes. I mean, like, I've been now interacting with clients are saying, boss, I have implemented the complete ITIL V3, I have a dashboard in place, I have a balanced scorecard, but still when I'm going to my business users, they are not very happy. From the general board meeting I'm coming, everything I'm showing green results, but CIO says, you guys are showing me green thing, but that's not really the reality in the background. So where is all this best practice going into picture? Enterprises don't want ITIL qualifications or best practices. They want satisfactory business IT services. Again, a similar thing which you would have seen many times. As part of best practice, people say let's right size, let's insource, let's outsource, let's decentralize, let's centralize, let's downsize. This is what basically many times best practices are making us do, doing so much of work activity, so many of various activities, discussions, meetings, conference, discussions. But is that what really customer wanted? And that's where we are saying let's focus on what customer wants and let's not focus on what best practices say. And that is where I feel that many times in the zeal of implementing best practices, we are actually ending up spending more than what really customer wanted. This is a similar example which I just gave. So where the customer is saying, yes, I know you and I know quality sucks, but IT just says uptime is 99.999%. But still the service is not happy. He says, but we have implemented ITIL, we have implemented CMI, we are level 5 matured company, everything is absolutely wonderful. But still the case is unsatisfied customer. So where is really best practices coming into help? So let's focus on what customer wants and instead of forcing customer to implement best practices, this is what is again coming evident from here. Another thing, we go about implementing the best practice. So here is a scenario where we are talking about ITSM project which was a best practice. It went about implementation, took around more than 6 months to 1 year. Successfully, finally, tool implementation is done, process deployment is done, everything has been done, and now the consultant comes and says that we have completed the ITM project. Business wants us to focus on some new application. But the fact is, whole project was done, and after that again, the IT many times just behaves that yes, we have done it, it's perfect, and it's all good now, but that's not reality. Many times that's not the destination which really business wanted to go to. And this is what we are trying to say, that many times in the zeal of implementing best practices, we kind and tend to forget that we are not really focusing on what customer requirement is, and rather we are just simply focusing on what best practice is saying, and that's where we need to really actually come back and move away from. Before I conclude, I think I'll let Satish, the real question. Yeah, sorry.
Let me first counter some of the points that you have made, Vijay. And I find it very difficult to argue for the fact that best practices are not, how can they not be? First of all, you have talked about ITIL and ITSM, and you have also talked about other certifications in the part of your slides. First of all, certifications are not best practices. Encouraging the team members to take the certification is a best practice. Having a certain number of certified people in a company is a best practice. But a best practice is only supposed to be just that. It is not supposed to be a solution to your problems. It's just a tool. You also talked about having phrases like downsizing, all those jargon that you presented on the slide. Yet again, removing jargon is the best practice. Retaining jargon is not. In my opinion, when you're talking about a best practice, how do you introduce a best practice into the organization? Let me first qualify the process for you, just so that we are all clear about how exactly a best practice is selected. The first part is that you identify the need for a best practice. You just don't implement a best practice for the sake of implementing. Once you have identified the need of a best practice, then you identify best practice. What are the available options in your industry or otherwise? Once you have identified best practice, then you evaluate a best practice. You try to see whether it's suitable for your business needs or not. It might be functioning very well in one organization, but it might not function equally well in your organization. And once you have verified the feasibility, then you start the definition and implementation. Why did I say definition? Because you might need to tweak it. And then you train people, you implement it, and you verify whether it works. Where exactly in this process does it come about? Am I increasing the jargon in my company, or am I increasing the number of certifications in my company? If I am going to pitch for a particular account in UK, where I have a requirement that I need Prince 2 certified project managers, not having those people inside my company will be a drastic business. So I would say certification jargons are different. You also raised a very good point, which I will agree with. You said that in the end, we are focusing on processes and systems, and what happens to the poor customer. I would just like to add that there are numerous standards, numerous frameworks, and numerous techniques that mandate the voice of customer to be heard in any program. It's a best practice, to have the customer giving the input the way we manage organizations. So I would still want to argue that best practices perhaps are definitely more important to us. I don't think that the cost relies there.
We wouldn't debate too much, but just answering to the question of where did those jargons come from. So those jargons are, most of the audience here know, they are part of the best practices. Core sourcing, outsourcing, insourcing. These are not something invented by people. They are coming from the best practices.
Yeah, but I just like to argue this point and then I'll let you promise. Core sourcing, outsourcing, this is not jargon. The whole reason we are all in this room is
absolutely, and they're not jargon.
It's not jargon.
It is just a few minutes back you were saying they were jargon.
No, I'm saying introducing.
But they are the best practice which people using.
Introducing a jargon for the sake of jargon is not a best practice. But I would just like to point out that core sourcing, outsourcing is definitely not just a jargon. It is the reality of the world and the reason why our industry exists.
So we agree, right, that they are not jargons. Yeah, they are the terminologies which are being used in best practices, and that's where I was saying.
And they're useful.
Useful, not useful, that is what is the important point here. Because of so many concepts which have been introduced by best practices, as a consultant, many times now you're trying to pump so many things onto the customer saying, this is available, that is available, let's take it. But what does really the customer want? And that's where we are saying that rather than focusing on best practices, focus on what customer man wants and then track back on how you can relocate to. So with this, I'll actually conclude, and then Ashish, you may also conclude here. And then, so this is what we are realizing. So I'm sorry I've used too much of ITIL and not other practices, but I'm actually from an ITIL background, and that's why I've used that, because ITIL is also definitely a best practice. So here, that's what he says. I followed all the ITIL procedures according to me. Now you should be a satisfied customer. That is what the service management folks are going and telling the customer. Everything has been done. CMDB in place, availability management in place, capacity management in place. Now you should definitely be satisfied. But the customer says, I am not satisfied. What's the problem? What's the wrong? And on top of that, then the consultant is again very smart. thought, let's implement a continuous service improvement project. And this cycle is just going on. And finally, one day, customer basically says, let's keep ITSM aside. Let me go back to my regular operational procedure, the way I have done. Let me go with my regular production and support mechanism, which I have done. I think that works out much better. So I mean, like, this is where we are seeing in the, and as I repeated in past, in the zeal of implementing best practices and trying to showing off that best practices are really best, they're not really turning out to be best. And that's where we need to see that we actually deliver what customer wants and not push best practices as the selling point. Thank you.
Thanks, Vijay. I'd also like to sum up my points again. And I still don't agree with your contention that best practices do not help us. First of all, as I said, if 70% of the organization is getting its workload reduced and getting the chance to do something better than what they usually do as a routine work, I think that's a good thing to have, and that's why best practices are useful. I would again say that the total cost of ownership of any implementation is reduced by adopting best practices, because you're basically using something for which you have verifiable data that it works or doesn't work. You basically know how it works. You are also talking about having customers as a part of the process. I don't agree with the fact that best practices make sure that customers do not become a part of the process. I think that's a fallacy. I am yet to come across a process standard or a process framework or a best practice recently published which does not put customer right in the center of every development project. So not developing it, not delivering it is not something which the best practice would say. It would say deliver something which you want, which is wanted by the customer. And I will finally also conclude that if an organization needs to prosper, if an organization needs to create value to itself, to its employees, and to its customers, it needs to have a process in place where everybody gets a chance to do different things, be creative, to do things with their time which they would otherwise never have been able to. But if my employees are all the time busy with doing routine work, like servicing a request, like processing the attendance sheets, like doing manual entries somewhere else, and not having the time at all at their hands to think of anything creative, I don't see how that will happen. My point will still remain. If you want your organization to grow, give it a set of best practices to make sure that it runs like a well-oiled machine, and so that it can develop products and services which are unique to the market and are able to differentiate your company to the outside world. That will be my point.
Thank you.
This way? Yeah. I think 2 minutes. You take 2 minutes.
Just think for a 2-minute break if you want so.
I've used this quotation in the past. I like it. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting different outcomes. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting different outcomes. Albert Einstein puts it very succinctly. And this is going to be my key argument point as I take you through a series of arguments to tell you why I think that best practices are an eyewash. I spoke about this very briefly while I was talking about the other side, Vijay. Let me bring this point more explicitly. The various costs of implementing a best practice, that is what we are concerned with. The costs are more than the benefits it gives. Let's talk about the cost. Number one, the cost of identification, the cost of evaluation, the cost of customization, the cost of training, the cost of implementation, the review cost, opportunity costs. I'll come to this point again. 7. What do you want to add? All the other points are self-explanatory. So, best practice is not something that you just go pick out from a shelf and say, oh, it's mine. There has to be enough research done, enough evaluation done for you to even select a best practice. Otherwise, you're going to end up with something which is not going to use at all. Here, my point will remain that the costs far outweigh the benefits. And let me take you to some more points about how exactly the